Alright, so let's talk about today's price action. Funny enough, if you are seeing on the screen right now, this is my YouTube channel. Don't forget you all to go and like and subscribe and make sure you ring the notification bell, set it to all, otherwise you'll not be informed. But let's go over this. Jokes aside, look guys, the most recent video I spoke about this, I literally said it's a trap 13 days ago, right? In fact, 11 days ago. Urgent warning, this is just the beginning. You can't really see, and I'm really not sure what happened with the thumbnails here, but it's a trap. You can kind of see. The market will continue going down hard from here, right? It's kind of the overall idea of what I was trying to say. So let's go over the price action. By the way, before you guys get to see the price action, do not forget to join in on the Patreon. It's now currently still discounted. Only 2 more days left for the discount before it expires. It can go as low as $56 if you pay annually. If you pay monthly, it's $70. Let's get into the price action. All right, so check this out. In fact, this is what we've been having today. This is not yet even a bull trap of any sort. We are literally, we just ended up moving, so you can kind of see, and let me go to the 1 minute real quick. That was my prediction for today. My assumption was that we will open roughly around this area of 6,404.30, where we have a major support or resistance level, depending on the circumstance, whether we're on top of it or below it. So as you can see, it ended up functioning as a support. We ended up opening above it. We ended up moving and testing some of the support levels on the intraday level. You can see some of the support levels that we have, the weaker ones, were tested throughout the day. You can see pretty evidently they were very well acknowledged through the noise. You can kind of identify that. And later, as I was identifying that the trend is still remaining, at least for the near-term future, I've highlighted in my Discord, I'll show later, how I thought that this gap, the market basically is aiming for that gap. Again, I did put a notice of a big maybe on this. Why? You will get to see very shortly. Because, well, the bottom line is that the momentum upwards is not all that strong, and this does not necessarily is going to be the bull trap we're anticipating. Now, those who are unaware, there are a couple more gaps above us right now. Currently, we have the the nearest gap we have to us right now is this one, 6,606, 6,591.95. You can kind of no, pardon me, sorry. It starts at roughly around 6,591.95 and lasts kind of towards 6,568.96. Give or take that leftover of gap, that's currently the nearest one. There is a probability of us closing that gap. We have further gaps as we continue upwards. As you'll see, we have another gap right here at around 6,716-ish, all the way to 6,703-ish. Basically a very tiny leftover of a gap. Something I've highlighted, in fact, I'm going to show this in a second, something I wrote in my community and spoke about many times in the various videos, and I said, guys, gaps, we do tend to pay a lot of attention to the gaps, and they do tend to play a significant role until the momentum and the cyclicality, the structure of the directional trend that we're having at the time will be far stronger than the attraction of the various systems to fill in the gap. And so the gaps end up being neglected, if you will, if you want to call that as such. Now, all these downwards gaps will get closed eventually. Eventually, the price action will stabilize, and eventually, in a long time, I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. I'm just saying kind of it will go downwards, continue, and then eventually it will come back up, and when it will come back up, it will cross the leftovers of these gaps, even if left over behind while continuing with the downtrend. Now, I have warned there is a significant amount of bullish momentum in the barrel, so to speak, kind of prepared to be spent, and I warned about this. I warned that we will see some form of a bull trap. The problem is that people tend to be too emotional, too reactive, very childlike when it comes to these sort of movements, too impulsive, if you will. And once you start zooming out just a little bit, if we're looking, for example, right now at the 5-minute time frame, right, we're going to realize that already momentum is fading, at least for this time frame, given how we are moving within a channel to the upside right now. You can kind of see the channel in the background. Although we are moving downwards, we still can result in moving to the bottom of the channel, maybe retesting that median, right? And continuing upwards. To verify whether that is a possibility or a probability, we're looking at the larger time frame. 30 minutes still insists that we are still within a bullish trend. We're bullish dominant in overbought territory, so that means, again, you got to notice the channel though. We are at the edge of the 30-minute short range channel. Right, short range meaning the average default of 100 that we don't change this one. This one is the default channel. We do use other lengths as well, but in this case, this is the default 100 length channel, 100 period. Again, in this case, 45 multiplied 100. So we're right now objectively bullish, but as I warned, some of that bullish momentum, of course, will be spent on the way up, and we'll see how that momentum is being spent. So if we're seeing right now objectively, currently the circumstances that all that momentum was spent just to bring us back to the top of the very channel we already acknowledged and solidified. You see we've tested that top before, and you see we already acknowledged the median multiple times. So that channel is definitely solidified. Of course, you can see the bottom multiple times have been acknowledged. That creates the average from which that channel is derived from. So as you can see, from here on out, it appears that we are far more likely to start losing momentum, very indicative of what we're seeing. We are in a downwards channel. If we're looking at the 1 hourly, which is even more significant, show longer length of the process, we can see we even hit the ceiling of the 1 hour time frame when we hit that high of 6,517-ish area. But now we are struggling to go above it. So right now, although we are still squeezing some bullish momentum that could be identified right here in the 4 hours, all in all, now that we're zoomed out that much, we realize, wait. We have a longer duration channel, and all we're doing right now is basically moving to the median, something I've warned before. You can kind of see the head and shoulders, inverted head and shoulders structure that is starting to occur. So it's not going to be all that surprising to see that very behavior, and in fact end up resulting in a move higher to that higher band. It's not a certainty, and I've warned you, boys and girls, we still are revolving around the 6,666, simply because by moving downwards within the channel, we're still not out of the range of these very important levels. There is still a framework to be sort of played out, a rhythm for the market. In the very same way, we have corrective downwards movements, shallow, relatively speaking, downwards movements to retain the channel. You can see the blue lines kind of highlighting a channel, well, trying to at least. And even within that framework of an uptrend, we have downwards corrections. And so likewise, we're going to have upwards corrections within a downward spiral. Some, of course, are extremely biased, and it doesn't matter what I'm going to say. I'm not going to be able to convince them, and I'm not even trying to. This is not financial advice at the end of the day. I'm merely showing you my analysis. Some dude on the internet, some random dude who has almost 2 decades of experience and knowledge by working as an account manager and an analyst and so on and so on. But, still a dude on the internet. So on the daily time frame, we are seeing that, again, we are seeing the expression of that correction, very similar to how we've had corrections prior. Some of them ended up being slightly shallower than this one. Right, this one feels a lot more stronger relatively to these, but if you compare to that one, it's not all that different all in all. This one, for example, all in all, even when we will end up having that higher correction, which this could be the beginning of, you see, I'm highlighting something very important. You're going to see in a second how all that bullish momentum is all very temporary, because everything is at the end of the day, but this is extra temporary in that sense that this is the reading from the very short time frame, from the very near range point of view. In that sense, we could have a correction to the upside, exactly as I'm showing, resulting in this revolution or revolving around that 666, still retaining the downwards pressure, having this more of a slippage, and still confirming that we're moving downwards, even though we're going to have that upwards trend, which is going to be very misleading to most people. Most people will think that's it, the bottom has been found. That's why it's a bull trap, because most of those people will start DCAing heavily here, thinking the market will continue going up. If the market been going up, so it's gonna go up, kind of. That's the usual assumption of the average Joe, which is very wrong. In fact, you have to understand and know about the cyclicality to understand that this is a mere correction, just to result with a downward spiral, continuing downwards, onwards, and onwards. And you got to understand the cyclicality of why that expectation is currently in place. In fact, you can see from our previous low something to indicate to you that the transition has already occurred from our lower low, sort of lower low, and now a significantly lower low. There is a downwards trend that is forming, irregardless of us having some what would feel like major corrections to the upside. They still are the regular ebb and flow of the price action and various rumors and thoughts that. But most of this, and in fact, if you watch my videos from weeks ago, like I said, you'll realize that I was saying exactly that. That most people will be utterly confused and will think the war is over because of some misreading messaging or some other nonsense. And again, I'm not trying to predict the actual occurrence, the actual event, as much as I'm able to identify through the technical analysis, the various measurement tools, through the support and resistance levels, through the rhythm, the momentum, put it all together into a singular equation. I'm able to identify whether the market is headed in one or another direction. And I know I'm already prepared. Like I said, your booze means nothing to me. I've seen what make you cheer. I already know my haters will be so happy to see this rally up and will capitalize on every moment trying to tell me how wrong I am. At the end of the day, I'll be the one who's laughing the last laugh, given how the trend will correct itself, even if that movement will be moving upwards temporarily. It will all still result in a downward spiral, continuing forward, onwards and onwards lower. Why do we think that? Well, simple. If you look at the weekly, this is a mere correction. And as I warned before, and I said, similar to what we have here, is a bearish movement within the framework of a bullish trend. Of course, that will result in a shallow correction and will still continue moving onwards. In fact, I was one of the only few people who warned about these occurrences and these downwards movements, that these shallow corrections. Pay attention, there's a major difference between this shallow correction and this downwards trend. Those are very, very different. They indicate completely different things of where we are in the cycle. Whether you know about it or not does not change how the market is going to behave or play out. So that's kind of it, boys and girls. I know this is very discombobulating and many will think that's it. This is the end of this is the bottom and this is the end of the downwards trend. That is it, you know. The crash is over. Don't say later that I didn't warn you. In fact, I'm gonna highlight and come back to this video in particular to show exactly how I was warning in advance that how misleading this whole movement can be. Yes, we may end up resulting in closing some of the gaps, but again, I highlight and say to those who do pay attention and actually listen to what I say, boys and girls, stop giving so much attention to the gaps. The gaps are a side effect. If the momentum and the cyclicality now requires the price action to continue going downwards, the price action will continue downwards, regardless of the attraction of the gap. The gaps are not that attractive. Okay, the trend is significantly far stronger than the gaps are. You got to understand that. That is a rudimentary, fundamental rule of understanding how the gaps are not critical. They do not play such a significant role as many people would like to think they do. All right, that is it. Oh, well, before I finish that, actually, just let's go over everything here. We still are extremely bearish on the weekly. On the monthly, we are just at the beginning, at the cusp of moving into, well, back towards that 0 point, in essence, moving into bullish territory, which is a negative in comparison to where we were all along, which is overbought territory. In other words, this is very indicative of a downtrend, and the divergence, the way these two channels, these two lines are sort of divergent from one another, and the larger the divergence is, the more indicative of a prolonged process. If they are parallel and close to one another, it's easy for them to cross over. The further apart they are, the longer the process and more tedious the process that is required to change the directionality. In other words, far more often than not, it does not. It just continues in that direction until it completes the entire process that had to be done via the cyclicality, which again many people are not aware of, and it's very unfortunate because it's the most critical point of things. I've been warning all along how our 3 months will overturn eventually, leading from that monthly bearish momentum. It's spilling over, it's now printing, if you will, being expressed in our 3 months, our quarterly, which many people do not realize is going to come to an end within about 2 hours and a half when today's session is over. So from the next session onwards, we're going to have another quarterly candlestick. And so given what we're seeing right now, it is very much a normal and probable possibility of seeing the price action spiking up on the initial first, I would arguably say, month, right? Given what we just seen in the momentum, spiking up to result in this sort of candlestick that will look sort of like so. Pardon me, my candlestick will look thin. I don't know how long, deep, or how deep it will be. There's a high probability of us falling to these lows, and as I've already highlighted, although I believe since we're talking about the quarterly, it's going to be significantly steeper and even faster lower, exacerbating, sort of showing how the momentum downwards is exacerbating, right, becoming even steeper and stronger. But in all reality, we have to stay grounded, and so there is still a very high probability of these levels playing a major role on the way down. No one here is to say that we are in a marathon downwards. This, this thing can be quite slow and can take quite a long time, right? But this is still quite a probable intersection, if you will, that may play a major role. We have several strong support and resistance levels within that vicinity. I already pointed those out since we're now making the video, so it will be sort of noticed on this video, the 6,298 range to 6,288.65. Since mostly I know my community will be watching, and maybe a couple new people from sort of outside, YouTube is really being just let's be straight, frank and honest about this. YouTube definitely put my channel in some sort of a shadow ban like thing, which does not allow a lot of exposure outside my community as is. I'm not crying nor whining. I'm just, saying things for how they are. And unfortunately, most of the people who watch these videos, those are people who are already familiar with what these support and resistance levels are and how critical they are. And so I'm certain they will play a role, a major role, at least on the monthly time frame. But when it comes to the quarterly, I have a feeling that we're gonna end up hitting even lower, closer to 6,101. I'm not saying necessarily as a prediction that throughout the following quarter we're gonna go that low. In fact, we may end up going even lower throughout the following quarter. What I am saying, that it does make sense and does appear, since we still are in bullish territory even on the larger time frames, that even though we will formulate a candlestick that will still overall, in the grand scheme of things, will be a lower high with a lower low, of course, but before it does that, it seems like if we will close and open our following candlestick within that vicinity, which that's kind of how things work usually, we will end up moving still first upwards before we end up correcting downwards. And so the overall candlestick will appear kind of like so, with a wick. Oh, Jesus, I can't draw it because of the width, but imagine a wick right here in the middle and a wick right here maybe at the top, because, well, that whole thing is going to revert back, as we say. So there will be a wick yay long, kind of, from where we ended up moving towards, or if you will, maybe like so. That will make more sense to people, right? So our candlestick will look like so. Eventually, it can be even lower, but the bottom line of the bottom line of the top line, what I'm trying to say is that we first will have a movement that is bullish in its nature and gonna confuse a lot of people and make them think that that's it, the bottom has been found, and various technical analysts that are biased will try to justify it by, look, we've tested the bottom of the channel, we've done this before, and we continue upwards, right? kind of like so. But no, in reality, we're completely transitioning and changing directionality. For that, you need to understand the cyclicality of things, right? Again, that, for example, is a very critical point in the cycle, but most people will compare it to that, and it will only happen when we actually break below what is the comparable percentile, right? Which is, if you really want to compare it percentage-wise, it will be, it's only when people will take this drop seriously when we're going to cross roughly around that 21% of a drop, 21% that we're going to enter that range that is lower than that. And in relativity, of course, so basically if you want to consider where that is in relativity, that is roughly around that 5,424. So only roughly around this range is where people are going to start taking the crash seriously, not realizing that was all predicted far in advance, and the market is generating some form of a harmonic pattern of a head and shoulders. But again, for that you need to understand the cyclicality and the various forces at play right now, which, by the way, I do teach one-on-one in my academy. I literally have meetings with various students, depending on the schedule that's comfortable for them, and I teach them all the forces that are at play right now, the momentum, what does it mean, how do you establish all these support and resistance levels, what are they derived from, how are they derived from, the cyclicality, and all of the above, harmonic patterns, everything and then some, right? Everything I can, everything I just mentioned and then some. And there are plenty of other perks like weekly meetings. For example, we're about to have a academy meeting in about an hour-ish from now. Of course, we do have our Patreon meetings and so on and so on. So I highly recommend those who are not yet Patreons but cannot afford the academy given the price. Actually, it's 60% discounted, but if for some people they feel it's steep and cannot afford it, I get it. Life is life. So 20% if you pay annually, not 20%, $70 a month, and that way at least you get exposure to what I talk about in my Discord. I discuss these various movements with my community every single day. I have this charting 101 that I've reestablished for my members to get the basic idea of things. Greg's charts, of course, so everybody can follow up, and I keep on updating everyone. Just for example, here it is. Here you can see how at the very early stage of the day, which is 4:47, I know not in American, it's Israeli time. For me, it's just 17 minutes past the market open. I was already able to say and tell that we will be probably closing that gap. Again, we can see at a certain distance with certain certainty, so you can see literally 3 pictures away on my post here. I predicted this, right? This, and that was the outcome. Now, as I mentioned, gaps are not as important as people like to believe. In fact, you can see again, I'm preparing my members, and I don't shy away from sort of incorrect prediction. I wasn't even trying to get this that accurate, and this is not sort of what my goal is day trading right now. I'm far more focused on the larger, steeper movement that is happening. And so the momentum, by the way, it ended up playing out similarly. If you think about it, all in all, we ended up having, if you think about what I've presented and what we ended up having, Jesus, I gotta delete some of that crap so we can see what's going on. So I think I may have just deleted too far. Did I? Okay, let's see. I hope I didn't delete too far. I think I've deleted too far. Maybe it's because I've deleted earlier, an earlier stage. Let's see if I can get it back. Oh yeah, here, I got it back. All right. So now those of you who kind of want to see how similar that is, if you can see, of course, the assessment there was that we will open up around these areas and we'll have some level of entanglement, which is this. So that play around, it's just that we ended up opening higher. So if you move that entire structure higher, you're going to realize how not far off I was. Again, this ended up moving sideways instead of downwards as I've predicted it to, and we ended up moving another layer higher. All in all, I also said that yeah, we are very probable to close this gap as well. That depends on the time frame and the length that you are looking. But all in all, by the way, if I would have wanted to, you can ask my members or just join the community and see. Sometimes if I do put in the effort, I can literally predict every step of the way, irregardless of sort of this confusion. And sometimes, yes, when you do have some geopolitical events come out and happen last minute, some of them can affect the market and steepen the projection. My assessment was that we're going to close that gap first, moving towards these ranges, and only then end up correcting higher. So all in all, not all that different, right? In fact, if you watch the videos from a week ago, or those that I've mentioned right here on my channel, those that I spoke about how it's a trap. In fact, I warned in advance. By the way, if you actually look back, so even further back, you're going to see 3 weeks ago, as I was sort of explaining how this downwards movement is going to play out, I was warning that there will be a movement to the upside, and this, for example, this video is as well highlights how it's all still just going to be a corrective measure and some form of a trap, and we will end up continuing to move downwards. All right, so that is it. That's all I wanted to tell you, boys and girls. In fact, I was not planning to make this video. I am so highly preoccupied with like family stuff, but I really thought it's urgent to bring everyone up to speed. So basically, bottom line of this video is that the bullish uptrend that you're gonna see is a trap. That's why it's so highly important to join the community, join the academy, to truly understand the in-depth thesis and why the market acts the way it does. In fact, if you're aware and know, I warned about all these occurrences that are currently happening in the market before the war even started, before Trump even went and took Maduro. So I've been sort of talking about these things and telling how this will unfold the way it does. In fact, as long as a year in advance, in fact even further out. Of course, I was not expecting things to unfold exactly event-wise this way, but more so on the technical aspect of the price action. I was able to predict that things will look the way they are looking right now exactly. So, I mean, you do you. If you want to shrug it off and think that I'm wrong, good for you, do that. But remember, I'm gonna enjoy the hater tears later. So, you do you. See you on the next one, boys and girls.